Namo Ramana. A very warm welcome to all the devotees for Raman Kendra Delhi's Sunday Satsang with Mr. Michael James. I will be requesting now Rajesh ji at the shrine of Raman Kendra Delhi to initiate with puja. Rajesh ji.
Okay. वक्रतुंड महाकाय सूर्यकोटि संप्रभा निर्विघ्नं कुरु मे देव सर्वकार्येषु सर्वदा। ओम भूर्भुवः तत्सवितुर्वरेण्यं भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो नः प्रचोदयात्। अस्तु मा सद्गमे तमसो मा ज्योतिर्गमे नित्यो मामृतगमे। ओम शांति शांति शांति। अरुणाचल शिव अरुणाचल शिव अरुणाचल शिव अरुणाचला अरुणाचल शिव अरुणाचल शिव अरुणाचल शिव अरुणाचल अरुणाचल शिव अरुणाचल शिव अरुणाचल शिव अरुणाचला अरुणाचल शिव अरुणाचल शिव अरुणाचल शिव अरुणाचल। हरि ओम हरि ओम हरि ओम। गणेशाय गोविंदाय रमणाय नाचलाय शिवाय नमः। हरि ओम। I'm going to recite the Bhagwan Stotram. अपार सच्चिद सुखवारी राशय योमिष मात्रम भुवन समस्तम गुहायितम तम रमणं गंभीरं चिंतावीन हृदय चिंत्यामि। ओम मासे मोसे जाताय नमः। ओम श्री रमणाय नमः। ओम गुरुवे नमः। ओम अखंड संविदाकार्याय नमः। ओम ओजसे नमः। ओम कानोदयाय नमः। ओम जगदीतावताराय नमः। ओम भूविना सत्वदितनाय नमः। ओम पराशर पुरोतंसाय नमः। ओम सुंदर तपे फलाय नमः। ओम कमलेशु चारित्राय नमः। ओम सावसाय वैते नमः। ओम सोनाचल मोली मानसाय नमः। ओम स्वनहस्तकाय नमः। ओम श्रीमदाद शांत मासत्रे लब्ध विद्याय नमः। ओम मां शक्ति पातेन पौद्याय नमः। ओम परमार्थ विदे नमः। ओम तीव्राय नमः। ओम पितृदाशे नमः। ओम हिंदू मोलिना पितमते नमः। ओम देशते सोन सैपाताय नमः। ओम तपोम्याय नमः। ओम उदासीनाय नमः। ओम आयोगिने नमः। ओम महोत्साय नमः। ओम कुशाग्रे नमः। ओम शांत संकल्प संभ्राय नमः। ओम सुसदसे नमः। ओम सवित्रे नमः। ओम स्थिराय ओम तपे सभी सत्संगाय नमः। ओम फूलांबित बोलो चोचनाय नमः। ओम चंद्रिका हासी मंडिता नंद मंडलाय नमः। हरि ओम। ओम शुद्धवाण समासीनाय नमः। ओम शुद्ध विभम ब्रह्माय नमः। ओम वेद वेदांत तज्ञाय नमः। ओम क्षीण मुद्रे नमः। ओम त्रिगुणातिकाय नमः। ओम विरूपाल दुआवासाय नमः। ओम विराजल चलाकृते नमः। ओम उदित नयनाय नमः। ओम पूर्णाय नमः। उर्जल तांडवाय नमः। ओम गंभीराय नमः। ओम परमाचार्याय नमः। ओम सुप्रसन्नाय नमः। ओम अभयप्रदाय नमः। उदक्ष सहदिवाय नमः। ओम धीराय नमः। ओम दक्ष विमुखाय नमः। ओम सवराजे नमः। ओम हर्षे नमः। ओम भगवते नमः। ओम ईडियाय नमः। ओम विद्या विद्या शारदाय नमः। ओम विमलाय नमः। ओम दीतश्री नमः। ओम आपताय नमः। ओम विदुमार्पर्चकाय नमः। ओम समदशे नमः। ओम सत्यदशे नमः। ओम सत्याय नमः। ओम प्रशांताय नमः। ओम अमित विक्रमाय नमः। ओम सुकुमाराय नमः। ओम सदानंदाय नमः। ओम मृदुभाषिणे नमः। ओम ध्यानवाय नमः। ओम श्री सोना सहस्रभूष स्कंदाश्रम निकेतनाय नमः। ओम सदस्ये नमः। ओम सद्भक्तवनप्रताय नमः। ओम ग्रीष्मति सरोजाय नमः। ओम गीतोपदेश सार के ग्रंथ संशिष्याय नमः। ओम वनश्रमतातीताय नमः। ओम रसज्ञाय नमः। ओम सौम्याय नमः। ओम आत्मते नमः। ओम सर्वनिमत्सदा रामाध्याय नमः। ओम सरस्वती नमः। ओम आत्मा रामाय नमः। ओम महाभागाय नमः। ओम आत्मबुद्धि विधायकाय। ओम विनताय नमः। ओम विनुताय नमः। ओम विप्राय नमः। ओम मुनीन्द्राय नमः। ओम पावजुलाय नमः। उदर्शनसायिने नमः। ओम मुनि स्वात्मोदकाय नमः। ओम रजकांति का सानिध्याय। ओम समदंत मोचकाय। ओम अंशति विचंडा श्वेन। ओम संसारना वर्तकाय नमः। ओम सोनादि शक्ति दृष्टि नमः। ओम महाविद्या प्रकाशकाय। ओम विज्ञाय। ओम निसर्गी मातप से। ओम कमंडलुधराय। ओम कमंडलुधराय। ओम कमंडलुधराय। ओम सुकोविशंसाय। ओम गुहाय नमः। ओम दंडपाने नमः। ओम कृपा पूर्णाय। ओम भवभूषज्ञाय नमः। ओम स्कंदाय नमः। उदितमाय नमः। ओम अमर्त्याय नमः। ओम सैन्याने नमः। ओम पुरुषोत्तमाय नमः। ओम पुरुषोत्तमाय नमः। ओम पुरुषोत्तमाय नमः। ओम श्री रमणाय नमः। ओम श्री रमणाय नमः। हरि ओम श्री रमणाय नमः। ओम श्री रमणाय नमः। हरि ओम श्री रमणाय। अनाचल शिवाय नमः। अनाचल शिवाय नमः। हरि ओम। I am going to recite the Updeshar. कर्तुरा गया प्राप्ते फलम करम किम परम करम तज्जड़म किति मोदिदो पतन कारणम फलम शाश्वतम गति निरोधकम ईश्वरार्पितम निश्चयार्पितम चित्त शोधकम मुक्ति साधकम कायवं मने कार्यमुत्तमं पूजनं जप शीघ्रतमं जगतीशदे युक्त सेवनम अष्टमूर्ति देव पूजनम उत्तमश्चवादुच्चमर्दते चित्तजं जपे ध्यानमुत्तमम् राज्यधारया सोत शासनम सरचिंतनम विरते परम वेद भावना सोहम स्थिसो भावना विदा पावनी मत भाव शून्य से भाव सूझते भावना बला भक्तिरुत्तम इसलिए मने स्वस्थता किया भक्ति योगे वदाश निश्चितम वायुरोधन लीते मने जाल पक्षिव दोध साधनम सिद्ध वायवा सिद्ध की आयुता शाख दोदय शक्ति मूल का लय विनाशने उभयरोदने लयगतं पुने भक्तिनोमितं प्राणबन्धना लीनमानसं एकचिन्तना नाशमेधते नष्टमानसो कृष्टयोगिने कितमस्तिकिं स्वस्तितं यते दृश्यवारितं सिद्ध आत्मना सिद्धदर्शनं तत्त्वदर्शनं मानसं तु किं मार्गने गीते नैव मानसं मार्गार्जवा वित्तेस्तें वित्तिमाशिता विर्च्यमनो विर्चयमनि ऐम्यं कुतो भक्ति चिंतवते ऐपितत्यहं निजविकारणं ऐमिनाशवा यममद्यय स्फूर्तिहर्षयं परम पुरुषं इदम ऐं पदे अभिखे मनुहे ऐमिलीन के पल्ले सत्य विद्रेंद्रिये पाणदीत में नाम एक सद तज्जड़मसा सत्यवाची का सत्यायोजित चित्यायोजित चित्यायन इच जीवयो वेश जीविदा स्वभाव तो वस्तु केवल वेशानते स्वात्म दर्शनम ईश दर्शनम स्वात्म रूपते आत्मसंस्थि स्वात्म दर्शनम आत्मनिर्दया आत्मनिष्ठिता ज्ञानवर्जिता अज्ञानहीनचित ज्ञानमस्ति किं ज्ञातुमंतरं किं स्वरूपमे आत्मदर्शने अव्यापव एपुंचि सुखम बंधमुक्ति तम परम सुखम विंतति ही जी वस्तुदेविकं ऐं पेतकं निविवानकं मैदिनं तपो रमणवागिं ऐं पेतकं निजिवानकं मैदिनं तपो रमणवागिं ऐं पेतकं निजिवानकं मैदिनं तपो रमणवागिं हरि ओम श्री रमनारायण मगनेशाय नमः गोविंदाय नमः नाचना शिवम हरि ओम ओवर टू अनुराग जी
Namo Ramana. A very warm welcome to all the devotees for Raman Kendra Delhi's Sunday Satsang with Mr. Michael James. Mr. Michael James is Mr. Michael James has been addressing the devotees of Raman Kendra for a very long time. And this evening he will be addressing us on Anma Vidai. As we all know, Mr. Michael James had started his spiritual journey in Tiruvannamalai during his visit in 1976, where he stayed for over 20 years. He had a long friendship and association with Sri Sadhu Om and assisted him in translating Guru Vachakakovai, Nanyar, Ulladu Narpadu, and other works of Bhagwan into English. Mr. James is now based in London, where he regularly discusses Bhagwan's teachings with fellow devotees via email and Zoom. He addresses devotees of Raman Kendra Delhi every second Sunday of the month. I would now request Mr. James to please take over. Sir.
Om Namo Bhagavate Sri Arunachala Ramanaya. Namaskaram. Once again, before I start, I'd just like to say, if anyone has any questions, either about what I'm talking, either about the subject I'm talking about, or about any other matters related to Bhagavan's teachings, please feel free to write them. If you're on the Zoom meeting, you can write in the Zoom chat. If you're watching live on the live stream on YouTube, you can write in the live chat. And those questions will then be relayed to me. Before I start, I'd just like to mention one thing. I had written, because the subject I've been talking about for several months now, in fact, many months now, is Anma Vidai, which is Bhagavan's song on Anma Vidai. As I think you're all aware, Anma Vidai is a a Tamil form of the Sanskrit Atmavidya. So Bhagavan wrote this song on Atmavidya, saying Atmavidya is so easy. This is a very though there are only 5 verses. In these 5 verses, Bhagavan has given the basic principles of his teachings. As we can understand if we relate them to all his other writings, like Uladunapadu, Upadeshundya, Upadeshasaram in Sanskrit, Nanya, Arunachasthuti Panchakam, all these works, they're all, that is the principles that he talks, that he teaches us in these other works. There, a lot of the basic principles are alluded to in this song. So this is a very, very important work. And I've written a series of 6 articles in my blog about this. These articles have now been compiled into the form of a book. So this book is available on Amazon, but unfortunately it's not yet available on the Indian Amazon. But if anyone who's watching this is living outside India, if they're interested to know more about this, the importance of this work, and how much Bhagavan, how much meaning and implication there is in these verses, that book is available on Amazon. So I just mentioned that for anyone who is interested. So coming to the subject which I've been talking about, in the last few months, I've been talking about verse 4, which is one of the, well, all the verses, each of the verses are important in their own way, but this is the verse. I'll just to remind, to pick up the thread again, I'll remind what Bhagavan says in this verse. What he says is, for the bonds beginning with action, karma, to be untied, to rise above the devastation beginning with janma, birth, more than whatever path, this path is what is exceedingly easy. In other words, Bhagavan is saying here that this path is the easiest path of all. What is this path? This is the, I mean, what does he mean when he says this path in Margam? He's referring to the path of self-investigation. And then in the next sentence, he describes what this path of self-investigation is. He says, when one just is, resting without the least action of mind, speech, or body, are in the heart the light of oneself alone. That's all he said. There's no verb there, but the implication is the light of oneself alone will shine forth, swallowing everything else. That alone will remain. Then he says, Nitanubhutiye, the eternal experience, implying this is the eternal experience, this shining of the light of the Atmajoti, the light of ourself, the self-shining light of pure awareness. This is the eternal experience. When he says it's the eternal experience, that means it is always our experience. It's our experience even now. Now, when we've risen as ego, it seems to be obscured because we're, instead of being aware of ourselves as we actually are, we're now aware of ourselves as, I am this body, I am this person. But underlying that, this is our eternal experience. This is what we always actually are. And when we know us, when we turn within to see what we actually are, we will clearly see that we have always, this has always been our experience. This is the eternal experience. Then he says, Bidi iradu, fear does not exist. That is in this, when this light of pure awareness alone is shining, what is there to fear? There's nothing other than ourselves for us to fear. Fear arises only when we experience the appearance of otherness. But this appearance of otherness is only for ego. When we see ourselves as we actually are, there's nothing for us to fear. And then he ends by saying, Im Bambodie, this the ocean of bliss alone. This is that is what will remain. This eternal experience is itself the ocean of bliss. So. Oh yeah, about when he says, when one just is, resting without the least action of mind, speech, or body, what he implies here is we always are, we always exist, but now we seem to have risen as ego. So the state of just being, summa iripudu, is the state in which we do not rise as ego and thereby remain as we always actually are. But we rise as ego by attending to things other than ourselves. That is, the very nature of ego is always to attend to other things, to things other than ourselves. So we cannot rise, stand, or flourish as ego without constantly attending to things other than ourselves. This is what Bhagavan teaches us in verse 25 of Uludu Napadu, in which he describes ego as Uruvatra Pei, a formless demon. A pei is a Tamil word, which is more or less equivalent to the Sanskrit word pisasa. So they are demons that possess people. So now this ego has possessed us, so to speak, metaphorically speaking. So and ego is formless because it has no form of its own. Since it has no form of its own, it's got no separate existence, because separation is, there seems to be separation only when we see forms. Each form is separate from each other form. But in the state of beyond form, in the state of formlessness, there's no separation. The state of formlessness is the state of, that is, what is infinite is formless. What is finite is always formless. So our real nature is infinite. So in its real nature, ego is formless. So ego seems to have a separate existence only when it grasps a form and takes it to be I. So the form we now take to be I is this body. And this body means a form of 5 sheaths. It's not just the physical body. We don't just experience the physical body as I. We experience all the 5 sheaths, as that entire bundle of 5 sheaths as I. So this is what Bhagavan says in this verse is, Urupatri undam, grasping form, it comes into existence, it meaning ego. Urupatri nikum, grasping form, it stands. Urupatri undu mika ongum, grasping and feeding on forms, it flourishes abundantly. Uruvitu urupatram, leaving form, it grasps form. That is, the very nature of ego is to grasp form. Ego cannot rise without grasping the form of a body as I. And it cannot stand without continuing to grasp the form of that body as I. And having grasped the form of a body as I, it is then constantly feeding on other forms. That's why he says, grasping and feeding on forms, it flourishes abundantly. So form, since ego is formless, all the forms that it grasps are things other than itself. So the very nature of ego, and because ego is formless, how does it grasp things? It grasps things in its awareness. So it's only by attending to things other than ourselves that we are grasping form and thereby feeding this ego. So what happens if, instead of grasping things other than ourselves, what happens if we try to grasp ourselves? Bhagavan answered that question in the same verse by saying, Tedinal otum pidicum. That means if seeking, it takes flight. If seeking means what? What is to seek what? That is, we as ego are to seek ourselves, to seek our own reality, to see who am I. We seek to know what we actually are. In other words, if we look back at ourselves to see who am I who seem to have risen as ego, we will find there's no such thing as ego at all. So ego will take flight, and what will then shine is our real nature, which is what he describes in this verse as the light of oneself. In other words, the Atma Jyoti, the light of pure awareness. So just like if we see a rope and mistake it to be a snake, we cannot kill that snake in any way. We can take a stick and start beating it, but we cannot thereby kill it. The only way to kill that illusory snake is to look at it very carefully. If we look at it very carefully, what do we see? Oh, it's not a snake, it's just a rope. So that in effect is killing the snake. So how is eradication of ego or manonasa achieved? Simply by looking at ourselves carefully. If we look at ourselves carefully, though we now seem to be ego, if we as ego look at ourselves carefully, we'll see, oh, what we actually are is just pure awareness, not ego at all. So ego is just an appearance like the illusory snake. The reality underlying this appearance, the rope, is pure awareness. So we can experience ourselves as pure awareness only by attending to ourselves keenly. If we attend to ourselves keenly, though we who are attending now seem to be ego, when we look at ourselves carefully enough, there's no such thing as ego to be found. So if we look for it, it takes flight. That's why Bhagavan said, Tedinal autumn come. If seeking or if sought, it takes flight. And what then shines forth is the light of ourself. That is what we always actually are. So how to just be? Since the nature of ego is to rise, stand, and flourish by attending to things other than itself, it can subside and dissolve back into its source only by attending to itself. So when Bhagavan says in this verse, when one just is, resting without the least action of mind, speech, or body, what he means is if we attend to ourselves and thereby cease rising as ego, if we subside back into our source, into the being from the pure being from which we've risen, with the pure awareness I am, we will thereby be as we actually are. And when we are just remain as we actually are, then in the heart, this light of pure awareness, which is what we actually are, alone will shine forth. And this is the eternal experience. And in this state, there's no such thing as fear. There's only the infinite ocean of bliss. So that is what Bhagavan is teaching us in this verse. I've already talked in detail about much of a verse, but just there's a little bit more to talk about these last few clauses. This eternal experience and so on. So I'll take up from where I left off last time. When one just is, resting without the least action of mind, speech, or body, in the heart, the light of oneself will shine forth clearly as I am I. This is what he pointed out in earlier verses. When by persistent practice we finally manage to be so keenly self-attentive that ego is dissolved forever in manonasa, all its vasanas will thereby be erased, and what will then remain shining is only the infinite light of pure awareness, which is what we always actually are. As he implies in this second sentence of the fourth verse of Amavide, Solmanadu Tanuvin, Kanmadi Siridindri, Summa Amandu Irika, Amma Ahatil Anma Jyotiye. When one just is, resting without the least action of mind, speech, or body, are in the heart the light of oneself alone. That's all he says, but it implies the light of oneself alone will remain shining as I am I. Anma Jyoti, or Atma Jyoti, I mean, that's a Tamil form of Atma Jyoti, means self-light or light of oneself in the sense, the light that is oneself. So it implies the light of pure awareness, which is what we actually are. The suffix a is an intensifier, but implies alone, actually, or certainly. So Anma Jyotiye means the light of oneself alone. Since there's no explicit verb in the main clause of this sentence, amma ahatil amma jyotiye, it implies in the heart the light of oneself alone will exist, or the light of oneself alone will remain shining. But it can also be interpreted as in the heart the light of oneself will shine forth clearly as I am I. And this latter implication seems to be the most appropriate one when we consider this clause along with the parallel clause in each of the other 4 verses. Because the implication of all these verses is that when we investigate ourselves keenly enough, our real nature will shine forth as I am I, meaning as awareness of ourself as ourself alone. That is, Bhagavan often used this term nan or aham, which means I am I. What is the implication of this? It means that we will be aware of ourselves as ourselves alone. Now we're aware of ourselves as if we are something other than what we actually are. We're aware of ourselves as I am this body. But when we know ourselves as actually are, we know that we are not this or that. We are only I and nothing other than I. So I am I. That is, the parallel clauses in the other 4 verses are Maya idea veli veyon swayam anma bilangume. In the heart space, which is real, oneself, the sun, will certainly shine by oneself. In the first verse, Ninevugal poi guheul nan ena anma jnaname tanai tihurum, thought ceasing in the cave, meaning the cave of the heart, atmajnana alone will shine spontaneously as I am I. In the second verse, Tannul anma prakasame minnam, within oneself, atma prakasa, the light, the shining of oneself alone will flash forth. Like lightning. Minnam means to flash, but it means to flash like lightning. That's in the third verse, and in the final verse he says, the verse we are yet to come to, Anamale enan ma kaname, which means oneself, which is called Anamale, will certainly be seen. So in all these verses, there's the formation of each of these verses are structured in a certain way, but there's a clause in which he implies if we investigate ourselves and see what we actually are, then that alone is what will remain shining as I am I. And our real nature alone will remain shining as I am I. To know ourselves as the light of pure awareness, which is the eternal experience of infinite happiness, devoid of even the slightest trace of any fear, we do not need to do anything at all, but just be as we always actually are, with our entire attention fixed firmly and unshakably on ourself alone. In the next sentence of this 4th verse, Bhagavan says, Nitanubhutiye, the eternal experience, thereby implying that Atma Jyoti, the light of pure awareness that shines forth when we are so keenly self-attentive that ego dissolves forever, and we thereby remain without the least action of mind, speech, or body, that light of pure awareness, that Atma Jyoti, that is our eternal experience. That is, though we seem to be aware of ourselves as something other than pure awareness, so long as we rise and stand as ego, when we know ourselves as we actually are, we will know that we are never anything other than pure awareness, because we are immutable and are therefore never affected, even in the least, by the appearance of ego or any other thing, by the appearance of ego and all other things or any other thing, which seem to exist only in the view of ego and not at all in the clear view of pure awareness. In other words, pure awareness is ever unaffected by the appearance or disappearance of ego, because in its view, there's no such appearance or disappearance at all. What is alone is as it always is, and what is only pure awareness. So that is our eternal experience. But to recognize that as our eternal experience, we need to see we need to be aware of ourselves as we actually are. And being aware of ourselves as we actually are entails being what we actually are. As Bhagavan says in verse 26 of Upadesha Tanai iritale tanne aridalam. Being oneself alone is knowing oneself, because oneself is not, we're not two selves, one self to know another self. So we can know ourselves only by being ourselves, because what we actually are is just pure awareness. And pure awareness, to know pure awareness, what does pure awareness has to do? It has to just be as it is. By just being as it is knowing itself as it is. So since that is what we actually are, to know ourselves as we actually are, we just need to be as we actually are. In other words, we need to cease rising as ego and just remain as pure being, which is what we always are. And that pure being is itself pure awareness. In other words, sat is chit. So just by being as we actually are, we are knowing ourselves as we actually are, because what we actually are is sat chit. It is both being and awareness, but not two things. It's not being and awareness. It is sat chit. It is being awareness, because that is the very nature of being is awareness. I mean, the very nature of awareness is being. They're one and the same thing. They're not, sat and chit are not two different things. And sat and chit are themselves ananda. So that is Sat Chit Ananda is not a description of three things, or it's not even one thing with three features. It's three descriptions of one and the same indivisible thing. As Bhagavan describes it in verse 28 of Upadesha, he says it is Anadi, Ananta, Akanda. Akanda means it's unbroken. We cannot separate Sat from Chit, or Ananda from Sat or Chit. So all these three words are all referring to the same thing. So the very nature of Sat being is awareness and is happiness. Then in the next sentence, he says, Iradu BDA. Fear does not exist, or fear will not exist. We can take it either way, because desire and fear can arise only in a state in which something other than ourselves seems to exist. But in the light of pure awareness, which is our eternal experience, it is clear that nothing other than ourselves could ever exist or even seem to exist. That is what we actually are, is ekam eva advitiyam, one only without a second. It's only when there's a second that we've got something to desire or something to fear. But when we alone exist without a second, what is there for us to desire? What is there for us to fear? So long as we rise and stand as ego, fear is inevitable, and so is desire. So if we want to be free of fear and free of desire, all we need do is to investigate and know what we ourselves actually are. When we know ourselves as we actually are, we'll know there's nothing other than ourselves, either for us to desire or for us to fear. So this is the perfect state. It's a state of infinite happiness, because when we are in a state in which we can never be troubled by desire or fear, what greater happiness can there be? So this is the greatest, this is the ocean of happiness, as he goes on to say in the final clause. That is, in the final clause, he says, Imba Ambodie, the ocean of bliss alone. And thereby implying that when we know ourselves as the light of pure awareness, I am, it will be clear that ego and all its desires and fears never actually existed at all. So what will then remain is only the infinite ocean of bliss, which is what we always actually are, and which is therefore our eternal experience. In order to know ourselves as the light of pure awareness, which is the eternal experience of infinite happiness, devoid of even the slightest trace of any fear, we do not need to do anything at all, but just need to be as we always actually are, with our entire attention fixed firmly and unshakably on ourself alone. Therefore, knowing ourself is extremely easy, extremely easy. If it seems at all difficult for us to know ourselves, to know and to be what we actually are, that is because we do not yet have all-consuming love to know and to be what we actually are. And we lack such love because we still have so much liking to know and experience things other than ourselves. And hence we are unwilling to let go of all such things. We can clearly see such lack of willingness whenever we try to be self-attentive, because instead of keeping our entire attention fixed firmly on ourselves, we willingly allow it to be frequently distracted away towards other things under the sway of our Vishaya vasanas. Therefore, we can cultivate the requisite love only by patiently and persistently trying to be self-attentive, bringing our attention back to ourselves whenever it is diverted away towards anything else. If we persevere in this simple practice, we will eventually dissolve forever back into pure awareness, whereupon we will see for ourselves how extremely easy this Atma Vidya actually is. So that sums up this verse, this fourth verse. One thing that is to be noted in all these four verses, all the five verses, in each of the verses, Bhagavan ends. I'll just get the just to make it easy to refer to. In verse 1, he ends by saying, Imbam pongame, that is bliss will surge. That's the final clause. The final clause of the second verse is Imba taname. That's Tanam, I think here is Stanam. It is the abode of bliss. In verse 3, he says, Imba vikasame, because I think that's the shining of happiness. Here in this verse, he says, Imba Vambodie, the ocean of happiness. And in the final verse, verse 5, he ends by saying, Imbu Torname. So what Bhagavan is repeatedly emphasizing is that when we know ourselves as we actually are, that is the shining forth of infinite happiness, which is our eternal experience. So that happiness will shine forth only when we know ourselves as we actually are. And as he emphasizes in the next verse, in order to experience that happiness, firstly, Aralam Vainame, grace is all important. That is, the very nature of ego is to have desire for things other than itself, because since we cannot rise, stand, or flourish as ego without constantly grasping things other than ourselves, the very nature of ego is to have desire, to have liking for things that are other than ourselves. And these things are not, none of these things are real. They're all just an appearance. But so long as we have desire for these things, we are unwilling to let go and merge back into our source. So the love that is required in order to know ourselves as we actually are does not come from ego, because it's contrary to the very nature of ego. That love can come only from what we actually are, from our own reality. So so long as we rise as ego, we experience that love, which is our own real nature, as grace. But as Bhagavan said, grace is not something that comes from outside. Grace is not something that descends from heaven. Grace is what is always shining in our heart as our own being. So if we want to open our heart to grace, if we want to imbibe the grace, if we want to take the full advantage of the grace, we need to turn within. As Ramakrishna Paramahamsa said, grace is like the wind. It's always blowing. But in order to be moved by that, he used the analogy of, because he lived by the Ganga. On the Ganga in those days, all boats uh, um, were driven by wind. They were sailing boats. So he often saw these sailing boats sailing on the Ganga. So he says, if we want to be benefited by the wind, we need to open our sails. In other words, we need to open our heart to the grace. The grace is ever there. But we need, instead of turning outwards and rushing after the world, we need to turn back within and thereby open our heart up to grace. That grace is ever shining within us, but we are blocking it off, so to speak, when we misuse it to go outwards. So if we want to yield ourselves to grace, if we want to get the full benefit of grace, we need to turn within and subside within. Another beautiful analogy Ramakrishna Paramahamsa gave, he said, grace is like rain. It's always pouring. But if the rainwater falls on a hill or on a mound, what happens? It all runs off. Where does the rainwater accumulate? Only in the low-lying places, in the depressions, in the pits, in the places that are low. So if we are full of ego, full of pride, we are like a mound or a hill. The rain of grace will all run off us. Whereas the more we subside, the more we sink low, the more the grace will accumulate in our heart. So these are beautiful analogies he gives. And Bhagavan emphasized the need for grace so much, because without grace, we will continue running out after the world. It's only grace that gives us the love that is required to turn within. And as Bhagavan said, bhakti is the mother of jnana. That is, we cannot turn within and know what we actually are without all-consuming love. And that love can come only from grace, only from our own reality. So that grace, as Bhagavan often said, is what is always shining in our heart as eye. But though it's always in our heart, we are constantly looking outwards and ignoring it. So if we want to be fully benefited by that grace, with all-consuming love, we need to turn within and merge back into our own being, which is itself grace. It is itself the infinite ocean of love and happiness. As Bhagavan sang in verse 101 of Aksharamlai, Ambu Vilalipol Amburu Vunilene Ambai Karitaral Arunachala. That is, he describes Arunachala as Amburu, as a very form of love. So in this verse, he says, like ice in water, melt me as love in you, the form of love. So love is our real nature. But when we rise as ego, we are like a small piece of ice, or that is a hailstone, or a snowflake that has fallen in the ocean. So we need to be dissolved back into this ocean of love and thereby lose our separate individuality. So Bhagavan's path is the true path of bhakti. It's the ultimate path of bhakti. It's where all other forms of bhakti lead, is to this path of turning within and surrendering ourselves completely. Surrendering ourselves to what? To God, or to whatever God or Guru. In other words, to our own reality. It's surrendering our rising to our being. Being is what we actually are. Our being is God. Our being is Brahman. Our rising is ego. So we need to surrender this rising back to being by just sinking back into the heart and being as we actually are. So this is I think I'd said enough about verse 4. Have any questions been asked, or shall I continue to take up verse 5 now?
Uh, Namo Ramana sir, there is one question. I shall read
Mm.
it out to you. It has
Yeah,
come on YouTube
right,
uh, from the ID Soul Musica. The question
right.
is, quote, Michael James, Namaskar. I feel fear. So the understanding of Atma Vichar is by holding on firmly to I am, and to the extent I subside, the fear will drop. Self
Yes,
remembrance, the key, unquote.
yes. Is that a question or?
Uh, I think it's a question, sir. Towards the end, when Soul Musica says self-remembrance is the key, it is coming with a question mark.
Ah, yes, 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 absolutely. Self-remembrance is a key. What does self-remembrance mean? If we remember a name of God, what are we doing? We're keeping our mind on that name of God. We're remembering that name of God, keeping that name of God constantly in our mind. But as Bhagavan said, the first and foremost name of God is I am. And what does this name, when we meditate on a name of God, we are not just meditating on that name, we are using that name as as a, an aid to fix our mind on what that name refers to. So if we meditate Namah Shivaya, for example, we are using that name to fix our name on Shiva. If we're saying Krishna, or if we're saying Ramana, or whatever name we're saying, we are using that name as an aid to fix our mind on what that name is referring to. So, since the first name of God, the original name of God is I am. Bhagavan even said, it is often said that Om is the original name of Brahman. But Bhagavan said, even before Om, I is the original name of Brahman. Bhagavan said, I is the elder brother, Om is the younger brother. So the first and foremost name of God is I, because Brahman is what is always shining in our heart as I. So just like when we are meditating upon a name and form of God, we use the name of that God to meditate, to fix our name on that form. In the case of this path of vichara, the name we are focusing, well, but what we are trying to focus our attention on is ourself. And ourself is what is denoted by that name I am. So just like in uh, Nama Smarana is a means to remember God. Remembering in this path, we are just trying to remember our own being. And by fixing our mind on our own being, that is the only way. Bhagavan has in Nana, people often say, how can you say that self-attentiveness is Atma-vichara? What authority is there for saying that? Bhagavan may have meant something different. No, he very clearly defined what he meant by Atma-vichara in Nana. In the 16th paragraph, there's a sentence in which he says, Sada kalamum manate adma bil Vaitirupatikutan Atma-vichara Mendrupaya. That means the name Atma-vichara is only for always keeping the mind on oneself. When we say name is for something, that means that name refers only to that. So what Bhagavan means by Atma-vichara is only keeping our mind on ourselves. Keeping our mind on ourselves means what? Keeping our attention on it. So whether we call it self-remembrance or or self attentiveness or self investigation. It's all the same thing. So that is what we need to do. The whole problem is, Bhagavan sometimes said, but it's all a matter of attention. The whole problem is that we're constantly allowing our attention to go outwards towards other things. We're constantly attending to things other than ourselves under the sway of our Vishaya vasanas. So we need to break the. Now our Vishaya vasanas are very strong because we've been cultivating these Vishaya vasanas for countless crores of Janmas. Now we've got to undo all that. We've got to. That is, we have strengthened the Vishaya vasanas by constantly allowing ourselves to be swayed by them. Now we need to cease to refrain from being swayed by these Vishaya vasanas, and by clinging firmly to our own being. The more we cling to our own being, in other words, the more we attend just to I am and to nothing other than I am, the more the vasanas will lose their strength. But that is, the Vishaya vasanas will lose their strength, and the love to attend to ourselves, which is what is sometimes referred to as sat vasana, the inclination just to be, or the inclination to hold on to our being, that will get strengthened. So the way to, as Bhagavan said, bhakti is the mother of jnana. So love is essential on this path. That bhakti is essential on this path. How to cultivate that bhakti? The most effective way to cultivate the bhakti is by patient and persistent practice. It doesn't matter how many times our mind goes outwards. We need to bring it back and fix it on ourselves again and again and again. By doing this, we gain abhyasa bala. By the strength of that practice, as Bhagavan says in verses 8 and 9 of Upadeshundya, these are two very, very important verses. Because up to verse 7, Bhagavan has been talking about the path of bhakti as a path of action, of puja, japa, and dhyana. These are actions of body, speech, and mind. And each in this order is more efficacious than the previous one, more efficacious in purifying the mind. And in verse 7, he says, rather than the interrupted meditation which is uninterrupted, like the flow of a river or the flow of ghee, if the ghee is being poured, it gets poured in an unbroken flow. Like that, our meditation should be unbroken. That is, we should, if we're meditating on a name or form of God, for example, we should keep our attention fixed on that name or form of God. If our attention is constantly wavering away towards other things, that means we have more love for those other things than we have for the name and form of God. So that's what Bhagavan says in verse 7. But then in verse 8, he says, rather than Anya Bhava, Ananya Bhava, in which he is I, is the best among all. What does he mean by Anya Bhava and Ananya Bhava? In this context, Anya Bhava means meditating on God as something other than ourselves. Anya means other. So meditating on what is other, it implies meditating on God as if he were something other than ourselves. So when we're meditating on a name or form of God, that name and form of God is obviously something other than ourselves. But better than that is, with the understanding that he is I, to meditate on nothing other than I. In other words, to meditate on nothing other than ourselves, with the understanding that he is ourself. What is shining in our heart as I, that is God. So meditating on I is the best. Meditating upon nothing other than I, that is the best among all. It's the most effective way to purify the mind, and it's the only means by which we can eradicate ego and thereby eradicate the mind. So that's verse 8. Then in verse 9, he says, Bhava Balatinal. Bhava Balatinal here means by the strength of meditation. By the strength of what meditation? That meditation on nothing other than oneself, on that Ananya Bhava. So by the strength of that self-attentiveness is what he implies. being in one's in sat bhava, in the state of being which transcends bhavana. Bhavana in this context implies mental activity. That is, so long as we're meditating upon anything other than ourselves, even if we're meditating upon a name and form of God, that is a mental activity. But when we're meditating on ourself alone, that is a cessation of mental activity. So by the strength of that self-attentiveness, being in the state of being which transcends all bhavana, in the sense of mental activity, that is parabhakti tattva. That is the very nature of the very tattva of supreme devotion. So it is, how do we achieve that state of just being in our state of being? It's only by the strength of by that bhava balam. Bhava balam implies the strength of meditation. Which meditation? The strength of ananya bhava. Because it's only by the that's why I say that abhyasa bala, that strength of practice is so important. We can gain the strength to be as we actually are only by constantly attending to ourselves. Bhagavan says the same thing in other words in the 6th paragraph of Nana. What he says in the 6th paragraph of Nana is, wait a second, I'll just get it.
Sir, I just also let you know there are a couple of follow-up comments and questions from Soul Musica on the previous
Okay.
question.
Okay, very good, very good. I very much appreciate it when people ask questions because it makes it more interactive rather than me just talking. So anyway, I'll finish answering this because these are all points connected together about the importance of practice. Because Soul Musica asked about that self-remembrance. Whether we call it self-remembrance or self-investigation or self-attentiveness, it's the same thing. But what is important is the perseverance in the practice. This Bhagavan makes very clear in the 6th paragraph of Nana. So I'll just read some sentences from this. He begins by saying, Nana ennum vicharane inaleye manamadangam. That means the mind will subside or the mind will cease only by means of this investigation, who am I? Then he says, Nana ennum ninevu, matra ninevugale ellam aritu, pinnum sudu tadipol, mudivil tanum arium. Here he begins this sentence with the term Nana ennum ninevu, the thought, who am I? We need to understand what he means here. Some people think the thought, who am I, means thinking the words, who am I? But that is not what Bhagavan means here. He's using the word ninevu, thought, here in a metaphorical sense. So what he referred to in the previous sentence as nana ennam vicharane, the vicharana, who am I, the investigation called who am I, is what he refers to here as the thought called who am I. But it doesn't mean literally the words who am I. It means the attention that the effort we make to turn our attention back to ourselves to see what we actually are. The reason he uses this word ninevu here is when we direct our attention to anything other than ourselves, that movement of our attention away from ourselves towards that other thing is what is called thinking, is what is called a thought. So all thoughts are attention paid to things other than ourselves. So since attention to other things are called thoughts, here he refers to attention to ourselves. He refers to it metaphorically as a thought. That instead of our mind moving outwards to other things, the mind is moving backwards, back within to see who am I. So that's what he implies by this term, nana ennam ninevu, the thought, who am I, destroying all other thoughts, will in the end itself be destroyed, like the stick, like the the corpse burning stick is literally what it means. Pinnam chudu tadipole, the corpse burning stick. What he means by the corpse burning stick is when a body is being cremated, in order to ensure that the body is completely burned, a stick is used to constantly, if burning embers, if burning sticks fall out of a fire, they need to be pushed back into a fire. So the fire needs to be kept together and burning fiercely in order to burn the corpse completely. So, but that stick that is used for tending to that fire, constantly stirring and keeping the fire burning, that stick will obviously catch fire. And in the end, once its work is done, since it's already burning that stick, it's just thrown on the funeral pyre and it burns along with everything else. So using that as an analogy, Bhagavan says, if you want to destroy all other thoughts, you should allow room for only one thought in your mind. That is the thought, who am I? It doesn't literally mean thinking the words, who am I? What he refers to as the thought, who am I, is the attention that we pay to ourselves. So in order to prevent us attending to anything other than ourselves, we need to keep our attention fixed firmly on ourselves. By keeping our attention fixed firmly on ourselves, we destroy all other thoughts. And then even this thought is destroyed. That is, the effort that we make to attend to ourselves will be destroyed. That is what he implies here. It's a very significant and very deep meaning in this sentence. Then he goes on to how to actually put this into practice. Then he says, Pira enangal erundal abatre purti panmanuku etane amal ave yaruku undayana endru vicharika vendum. That means if other thoughts rise, that is, we're trying to keep our attention fixed on I alone. But if other thoughts rise, how do we deal with them? If other thoughts rise, without trying to complete them, in other words, without allowing our attention to follow those thoughts, because we all know if one thought rises in the mind, that leads to another thought, leads to another thought, leads to thoughts rising chains. That is, so when we begin to think one thing, we follow a chain, and then we get diverted on another track and another track and another track. That's the nature of the outward going mind. So whatever thought arises, we shouldn't try to complete it. In other words, we shouldn't follow that thought. Instead, what should we do? Adayaruku and Dayana Endru Vicharika Vendam. It's necessary to investigate to whom they have arisen. Because whenever thoughts arise, the arising of thoughts means the appearance of thoughts. To whom do all thoughts appear? They appear to me. So who am I? So investigating to whom, when he says it's necessary to investigate to whom they have appeared, what does that mean in practice? Investigating to whom means the fact that the thought has arisen means our attention has gone away from ourselves. So investigating to whom it has arisen means turning our attention away from the thought back to ourselves, the one to whom the thought has arisen. So investigating to whom means turning our attention away from whatever appears back towards ourselves. So whatever may appear, to whom has it appeared? To me. We turn our attention back to ourselves. Bhagavan doesn't say here questioning. He said it's necessary to investigate. The verb he uses is vichari, vicharika vendam. It's necessary to investigate to whom. So how do we investigate to whom a thought has appeared? We turn our attention away from the thought back towards ourselves, the one to whom the thought has appeared. And then he goes on to say, etene enangal erinam enna. However many thoughts arise, so what? So Bhagavan doesn't ask us to try to stop thoughts. Let any number of thoughts arise, so what? Jagratei, vigilantly, Odvaru endam kalumbum pode. As soon as each thought arises, Idu Yaraku and Diana, Endru Vicharital. If one investigates to whom it arises, Enakendru Tondrum, it will be clear to me. That is, whatever thought may arise, to whom does it arise? It arises only to me. And that means we turn our attention back to ourselves. And having turned our attention back to ourselves, what do we then do? We have to try to hold on to that to that self-attentiveness. That's what he implies in the next sentence. Nana endru vicharital. If one investigates, who am I? Whereas investigating to whom implies turning our attention away from whatever appears back towards ourselves. In this context, investigating who am I implies holding on to that, having turned our attention back to ourselves, having restored the self-attentiveness, we then need to hold on to that self-attentiveness. So, nana ennam vicharital, if one investigates who am I, that means if we hold on to that self-attentiveness, manam tan pirapidituku tirambi vidam, the mind will return to its birthplace. What does he mean by birthplace? Birthplace is the source from which the mind has risen. What is the source from which the mind rises? It's from our own being. That is, when we wake up from sleep, or when we rise from sleep, whether in waking state or in dream state, from what are we arising? We're rising from sleep, but what is there but actually exists in sleep? What exists and shines in sleep is only our own being, I am. So our being, I am, is the source from which the mind has risen. So that is what Bhagavan refers to here as Pirapidam, the birthplace. The birthplace of the mind is our own being. So, but if we, having turned our attention back to ourselves, if we hold firmly onto that self-attentiveness, the mind will return to its birthplace. That is, the mind will subside back into its source. Erunda enamum adangividum. And the thought which had risen will also subside. That is, when the thinker subsides, the thought will subside along with it. But thinker is ego or mind. When we turn our attention back to ourselves, if we hold on to that self-attentiveness, we will sink back into our source. We will return to the place, our birthplace. And then he says, this is the very important, this is what I was leading up to. He says, Ipadi paraka paraka, manatuku, tampirapidatil, tangi nikam shakti, adikari kindradu. That means, Ipadi paraka paraka, when one practices and practices in this way, manatuku, for the mind, tan pirapidatil, tangi nikam shakti, the power to remain in its source, the power to stand remaining in its source, adikadi kindradu will increase. So here Bhagavan is emphasizing the importance of persistent practice. We need to go, paraka paraka means when one practices. So the practice has to be persistent. Doesn't matter how many thoughts arise. Whenever any thought arises, to whom does it arise? We need to turn our attention back to ourselves. So what he referred to in verse 9 of Upadesha as the Bhava Balam, the strength of meditation, is what he's referring to here as the manam pirapidatil tangi nikam shakti, the power to remain in its source, in its birthplace. That power is the power of practice. So it's only by practicing and practicing that we have gained that power to remain firmly in our source. So yes, the answer to the question is, sorry, a rather long-winded answer, but yes, constant self-remembrance or self-attentiveness is the means. Doesn't matter how many times our attention gets diverted away from ourselves. It doesn't matter how many times we forget to attend to ourselves. We need to, as soon as we notice the mind has gone away, and when the mind goes away, that means we're dwelling upon the appearance of other things. So to whom do all these other things appear? To me. So this is such a nice if we take it as a question, but it's not, it's more than just a question, because it's not a question, but we're asking a question to get an answer. But that is this question to whom is such a powerful tool Bhagavan has given us. Whatever appears, to whom does it appear? That is that it's not the questioning that is important, it's investigating to whom it has appeared. That is the key to turning our attention back to ourselves. Doesn't matter whatever may appear. I mean, in life, we go through so many different types of experiences. We go through pleasant experiences, unpleasant experiences, shocks, calamities, disasters, all sorts of things happen. Or some days, nothing special happens. It's just an ordinary day goes on without any event. But whatever it is, whether it's something dramatic or something mundane, to whom does all this appear? That is, none of this could appear if we weren't there to be aware of it. So it appears, whatever appears, appears to us. This touches upon the very heart of Advaita philosophy, because in Advaita, the fundamental principle of Advaita is ekam eva advaityam. What actually exists is one only without a second. So how then to explain the appearance of all this multiplicity? According to Advaita, it's all vivata. It's all just an illusory appearance. It's not real. So that's the fundamental, one of the fundamental principles of Advaita. But Bhagavan then comes in and draws out the important implication from this. Okay, if all this is an appearance, to whom does it appear? Because you can't have an appearance without it appearing to someone. So rather than just talk about this and say it's all an appearance, okay, if it's all an appearance, then to whom does it appear? Because you can't have an appearance without it appearing to something. So to whom does it appear? It appears to me. Then who am I? We turn our attention back to ourselves. So Bhagavan is a genius at drawing out the practical implication of all of Vedanta. So the hallmark of Bhagavan's teachings is his strong emphasis on practice. And this is what he's constantly digging into us, the need for practice, 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 because this is only by this abhyasa bala, by the strength of practice, that we can eventually gain this, develop the strength to be as we actually are, to remain without ever rising as ego. So I hope that's a useful answer to that question. What were the follow-up questions?
Thank you, sir. We've actually got a few questions coming constantly on YouTube, and
Okay.
a couple of questions I have received directly on Zoom. Uh, Given that we've got about 10 minutes, I suspect we may not be able to address all of them.
Okay.
So I will email all these questions to you. But to
Okay.
your previous question, Soul Musica had a couple of follow-up comments. I believe we should address those. The
Right.
first one is, and I think it is already addressed, but it's my duty to share this with you. Quote, keeping our mind on it. Mind means attention on oneself. Unquote. The second one is, yes, delusion of happiness lies within oneself. But radically, once one tastes that grace will dissolve one until that it's normal to feel fear or threaten. Unquote.
Sorry, what was the first question again? Just so I can
Yes, sir.
deal one by
The
one.
first, yes, sir. The first question was, quote, keeping our mind on it. Mind means attention on yourself,
Yes,
on
yes,
oneself,
yes,
unquote.
yes. This is a usage that is common to many languages. That is in English also. We talk about um, uh, keeping our mind on something means attending to it. And exactly the same in Tamil. When Bhagavan said keeping the mind on oneself, what he means by keeping the mind on oneself is keeping the attention on oneself. So yes, that's what Bhagavan means when he says keeping the mind on oneself. I imagine in most languages there's such a usage because we often the term mind is a very fluid term, but we use in slightly different sense in different contexts. But when we talk about putting the mind on something or keeping the mind on something or fixing the mind on something, it means attending to it. And the next question was?
So the next question from Soul Musica was, quote, yes, the delusion of happiness lies within oneself, but radically, once one tastes that grace will dissolve one until that it's normal to feel fear or threaten, unquote.
Yeah, that is the delusion of happiness is the delusion that happiness lies outside ourselves, because actually happiness is our own real nature. But when we rise as ego, we separate ourselves from our real nature, which is infinite happiness. So as soon as we don't actually separate ourselves, we can never separate ourselves from what we actually are, but we seem to separate ourselves because once we limit ourselves as this finite form, this body, we no longer experience ourselves as the infinite ocean of happiness that we actually are. So as ego, we always feel something is lacking. We feel we are deficient in some way. Since we feel we are deficient, we we look outside to fill up that deficiency. So we fail to look within, we look outside, thinking that if I can get this, I'll be happy. If I can get that, I'll be happy. If I have more money, I'll be happy. If I have more pleasures, if I have more leisure time, if I have more learning, if I have a if my wife or my husband is nicer to me, if I have better behaved children, if this or that, we always think something, or if I get a promotion in my job, or if I get a pay rise, or this or that, we spend our entire life, from the beginning of our life to the end of our life, looking forward, thinking, if I have this, then I'll be happy. If I have this, then I'll be happy. Bhagavan uses an analogy in Guru Vasika Kovai. There's a there's a tree that grows a lot in Tamil Nadu. It's a very fast growing tree. It grows into a big tree, but it's got very soft wood. It's got a sort of greenish bark. And the fruit of that tree, it's the English name for it is a silk cotton tree, because the fruit of that tree are long pods. And when the pods dry up and open, inside is the seeds with a soft cotton-like material. That is because that's dispersed the seeds by wind. So Bhagavan uses the analogy, just like a parrot who waits for the fruit of this tree to ripen, and it waits there patiently, and when finally the fruit ripens and bursts open, inside there's nothing edible. The parrot was waiting for a fruit to ripen, thinking it was going to get something. Likewise, we live our whole life always thinking, I'll be happy if I get this, I'll be happy if I get that. And we spend our life constantly deluding ourselves, thinking we'll get happiness from this, we'll get happiness from that. And we end up without the happiness we're looking for. Because what we are all looking for, that is, whatever pleasure we get, if you have desire for, say, the latest model of car, for example, some people are fascinated by what are the latest models and they want to get the latest model. If you have a desire for that, when you get that, because your desire is satisfied, you will feel a temporary pleasure from that. Oh, now I've got this car I wanted. But that pleasure is a very short-lived pleasure, because then you'll see your neighbor has got an even better car. And so you'll want that better car. So the nature of desire, Bhagavan says also in Guru Vachaka Kovai, there's no bottomless pit as bottomless and impossible to fill as the pit of desire. That is, however much we satisfy our desires, we want more, we want more, we want more. So we cannot be satisfied. Why? No desire, the fulfillment of no desire can satisfy us, because whatever pleasure we get from anything, well, it may be intellectual pleasure from learning, or it may be pleasure from uh, owning things that we wanted, or it may be pleasure of sensual pleasures, or whatever it is. These are all very trivial pleasures. None of them, they're all finite. They're brief. They last a short while and then they pass away. What we are all seeking, knowingly or unknowingly, is infinite happiness. Nothing short of infinite happiness is going to satisfy us. So we cannot get infinite happiness from finite things. So we are, the very nature of jiva, the very nature of ego, is dissatisfaction. We are doomed to dissatisfaction. Even if we do all sorts of punya karmas and go to the highest heaven, even if we go to Brahmaloka, we'll still be dissatisfied, because nothing finite can satisfy us. Even Brahmaloka, even which is said to be the highest of all heavens, the most blissful place, even that will not satisfy us. We'll still be dissatisfied because it's finite. Nothing finite can satisfy us. So the only thing that can satisfy us is infinite happiness. And infinite happiness is our own real nature. So we can, and so long as we are finite, we obviously cannot experience infinite happiness. So we need to know ourselves as we actually are. Then only we can experience infinite happiness. So until then, seeking happiness outside ourselves is futile. That's why Bhagavan said, in the first sentence of Nana, he concludes that sentence, in order to experience that happiness, which is one's own swabhava, which one experiences daily in sleep, which is devoid of mind, oneself knowing oneself is necessary. Tanne tan aridal vendum. Idaku nana ennum jnana vicharame mukhya sadhanam. This investigation, this awareness investigation, jnana vichara, who am I, is the principal means. So if we want happiness, if we want satisfaction, we need to understand we cannot get what we are looking for outside ourselves. We need to look within. We need to investigate to see what we actually are. So I hope that's an adequate answer to that question.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much. I have already emailed you about 5 odd questions that we received both
Okay.
on YouTube and Zoom. And as I say this, Soul Musica is sending greetings and thank you to you.
Okay. I
Uh,
hope the answers were useful.
I'm sure they were, sir.
Yeah.
Given that we have 3 minutes left, would you like to conclude now, sir?
Yes. Uh, I mean, next time I will take up verse 5 of Anma Vide. So I think there's not enough time to begin that now. So any of the questions, it's something that I could answer quickly, or the trouble is you ask me about what seems a very simple question, and I give a long, not a complicated answer, but my answers tend to be long because I'm trying to emphasize the
Sure,
point of.
sure. I've got couple of questions with me, which I've already emailed you. I'll
Yes,
share them. Maybe you can answer them quickly, sir. The
yeah.
first question in the sequence that they have come through is from Daniel Sekelski. Quote, in the night, I have very vivid dreams whole night and have no memory about deep sleep without dreams when I wake up. Does it mean ego never subsides and just alternates between waking and dreaming? Unquote.
No, we couldn't live without. I mean, sleep is an essential part of our life. maybe if we have many dreams, those dreams may leave a strong impression on our mind, and therefore we may overlook the fact that between those dreams there were periods of deep sleep. Deep sleep is it's that is from a biological point of view, sleep is necessary, but even from a spiritual point of view, because what are waking and dream? They're states of activity, of mental activity. The mind is constantly going outwards. The mind needs energy to go out, to be constantly active, and it cannot get that energy from anywhere other than its own source. So we have to subside in our source in order to be rejuvenated. So we couldn't continue mental activity ceaselessly. There have to be periods of sleep. So it's not, I mean, from an outward looking point of view, we can say it's a biological necessity. But from a deeper view, looking that the more inward looking view, it's the activity of the mind requires energy, and we expend that energy. So just like our mobile phone, if we don't charge the mobile phone, it's sooner or later it's going to run out of power. Likewise with the mind, when we are expending the energy throughout the states of waking and dream. Sooner or later, the mind runs out of it needs recharging, and it can be recharged only in the state of sleep. Because the state of sleep is a state where the mind subsides back into its source. And its source, our own being, is the source of all energy, all power. So without subsiding back into our source, we cannot recharge and gain the energy to continue. If supposing we try to keep awake, nobody can keep awake indefinitely. I mean, sometimes in there are situations, for example, in war, one of the ways in which people are tortured, if they think that if one army think there's soldiers of the other army have some secret that they want to know, or if they capture a spy, say, and they want to know the secrets, who are all the other spies in the network, they will try to torture the spy. And one of the most effective ways of torturing a person is sleep deprivation. If you prevent a person from sleeping, you completely, it's impossible to, even if someone tries to keep you awake, they'll reach a point where nothing can keep you awake. You'll be overpowered by sleep. So sleep, we all experience sleep. If our mind is very outward going, we may overlook the fact, but for a certain time every day, we are absorbed in deep dreamless sleep. Even to say for a certain time, that's true only from the perspective of the waking state or the dream state. Because in sleep, obviously, there's no time at all. We don't experience any time. When we wake up in the morning, we may think, oh, I slept for, often we wake up, and if we've been sleeping soundly, we're not immediately aware how long we slept for. It may seem that we've been asleep only for a short time, but when we look at the clock, we've actually been asleep for 6 hours or 8 hours or something. So in sleep, because in what exists and shines in sleep, that in dreamless sleep, is only our own being. So there's no time, no space, no phenomena of any kind whatsoever in that state, because all these things, all these phenomena exist only in the view of ego. In sleep, ego is absent, and therefore everything else is absent. I hope that's a clear answer to that question.
Thank you, sir. That was indeed a very clear answer. Uh, Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Would you like to conclude, sir?
Oh, yes. Om Namo Bhagavate Sri Arunachala Ramanaya.
Namo Ramana sir. Thank you for a wonderful and insightful session. We've had a very engaging audience who has got more questions than the time could allow us to handle. So
Okay, well that's good. That's
thank you.
good. That
Thank
okay.
you, Michael.
Thank you,
It's
Thank you,
everyone.
sir.
awesome.
Mhm.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
We shall now return back to the shrine. Rajesh
Yes.
ji, over to you for Arati.
ओके
Thank you.
सर ओके अरुणाचल शिव अरुणाचल शिव अरुणाचल शिव अरुणाचल अरुणाचल शिव अरुणाचल शिव अरुणाचल शिव अरुणाचल अरुणाचलावर केटा अक्षर मनमाले साठ करुणा कर गणपते कर मारुले कापे अरुणाचल शिव अरुणाचल शिव अरुणाचल शिव अरुणाचल अरुणाचल शिव अरुणाचल शिव अरुणाचल शिव अरुणाचल अरुणाचल में हमें पाऊ है देवर पाय अरुणाचल अल्पसुधन पोल अहमदने हमदे पाय अरुणाचल आरु कायने आनने अखिल पड़ता अरुणाचल इप्पने तप्पने एन्ने पित्ता इन यार विडवार अरुणाचल उन्हें माटी उड़ा उरुदिया सुजिर अरुणाचल उरुमना मुन्ने उलतरे वेद विरवार उनसे देवी अरुणाचल ओंकार पुल ओपयुल्ले पुण्यार रिवर अरुणाचल अरुणाचल शिव अरुणाचल शिव अरुणाचल शिव अरुणाचल अरुणाचल शिव अरुणाचल शिव अरुणाचल ओम श्री रमणाय नमः गणेशाय नमः शिवाय नमः ओम
Namo Ramana. A very warm thank you to Mr. Michael James and all the devotees for joining today's satsang with Mr. James. We shall meet Mr. James again second Sunday of next month. Till then, may Bhagwan bless all of us. Namo Ramana.